In 1945, the United States government went to Germany and recruited war criminals. Not accidentally, not unknowingly, with paperclips. The paperclip was not symbolic, it was administrative. When U.S. intelligence officers found a German scientist they wanted, a man whose file contained inconvenient entries about SS membership, about concentration camp research, about crimes the Nuremberg tribunals were actively prosecuting, they attached a paperclip to that file. The paperclip meant, handle this one differently. The paperclip meant, this man's past is not the point. What he knows is the point.
That is how a covert recruitment program gets its name. Not from ideology, not from strategy, from a piece of bent wire holding together two versions of the same man, the one who existed before 1945 and the one the United States needed him to become. The program began under the name Project Overcast. By the time it was renamed Project Paperclip, more than 1,600 German and Austrian scientists, engineers, and technicians had been identified for transfer to American soil. Rocket specialists, aerospace medicine researchers, submarine engineers, jet propulsion experts. Men whose work had been developed inside the infrastructure of the Third Reich, in some cases with labor drawn from concentration camps. The official justification was straightforward. The Soviets were coming. The Cold War was not yet named, but its shape was already visible. The knowledge these men carried about ballistic trajectories, about high-altitude human physiology, about weapons delivery systems, was knowledge the United States could not afford to let fall into Soviet hands. That was the argument, and it was not a dishonest argument as far as it went. But the surface explanation misses something. The program was not simply a race against Soviet acquisition. It was a systematic, government-authorized process of identity laundering, of record alteration, of bureaucratic erasure applied selectively and deliberately to specific human beings so that American law, which explicitly barred the entry of Nazi war criminals, could be navigated around without ever being formally broken. What happened inside Operation Paperclip was not a failure of oversight. It was the successful execution of a plan that required oversight to look away. And the psychological mechanism at the center of that plan, the thing that made it work, the thing that made thousands of people at every level of government participate without visible crisis of conscience, is worth examining with some care. Because you have seen that mechanism before. You have used it yourself. The concept is called moral exclusion. The psychologist Susan Opitow defined it in 1990 as the psychological process by which individuals or groups are placed outside the boundary within which moral values, rules, and considerations of fairness apply. It is not hatred. That is the critical distinction. Hatred is active. Moral exclusion is structural. It does not require the person performing it to feel anything at all about the excluded party. It only requires that the excluded party be reframed, repositioned from moral subject to instrumental object, from person to asset, from human being with a past to human being with a skill set. In 1945, American intelligence officers were not asked to admire the German scientists they were recruiting. They were not asked to forgive them. They were asked to do something far more psychologically manageable. They were asked to treat the scientists' histories as irrelevant to the task at hand. To mentally file the moral question in a separate drawer and close it. And they did, with remarkable ease. The reports written by American officers about Wernher von Braun during this period read like engineering assessments. Von Braun was the technical director of the V-2 rocket program at Peenemünde, a weapons system that killed approximately 9,000 people in Allied bombing campaigns, and was built using forced labor from the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp. At least 12,000 slave laborers died in those tunnels during V-2 production. The American officers documenting von Braun noted his expertise in rocketry, his organizational capacity, his cooperative disposition. The forced labor and the death toll were present in classified files. They were not absent from the record. They were present and treated as irrelevant. By 1946, more than 100 members of von Braun's rocket team were gathered at Fort Bliss, Texas, working under U.S. Army supervision. They were building rockets. They were drawing government salaries. Some of them had been SS members 18 months earlier. The question that most analyses of Operation Paperclip ask is, how did the government justify this? What arguments did they make? What legal mechanisms did they use? That question is real, but it is the lesser question. The deeper question is, why was it not harder? Why did the moral friction not slow the machine down more than it did? Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance, developed in 1957, offers part of the framework. When a person holds two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, we prosecute Nazi war criminals and we are employing Nazi war criminals, the mind generates psychological discomfort. The resolution is almost never to abandon the more convenient of the two beliefs. The resolution is to reframe, to introduce a third idea that makes the contradiction disappear. The third idea in this case was utility. These men are necessary. The alternative is Soviet acquisition. We are not rewarding them, we are deploying them. The moral accounting will happen later. The security threat is now. Festinger would have recognized this immediately. It is not rationalization in the sense of conscious deception. It is the mind's entirely automatic, largely unconscious tendency to protect its own coherence by adjusting how it categorizes what it sees. The scientists were not reclassified as innocent. They were reclassified as instrumental. And the moral framework, the one that would have created the dissonance, was quietly suspended. But this goes further than most people realize. The dissonance reduction was not only happening in the minds of individual intelligence officers making individual decisions, it was being institutionalized. The mechanism was being built into the bureaucratic architecture itself. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, which administered Paperclip, developed a specific procedure for handling scientists whose backgrounds were too problematic for standard immigration processing. The procedure involved generating new security assessments that downplayed, omitted, or actively softened the findings of earlier military government reports on the same individuals. This was not informal. It was documented. The State Department and the Justice Department both raised objections at various points. Those objections were routed around, deferred, or simply not acted upon by the agencies with operational control. What you are looking at is not a rogue operation run by a handful of ideologically compromised officers. You are looking at a bureaucratic system that had successfully distributed moral responsibility across so many people, so many offices, so many layers of process, that no single actor ever had to confront the full weight of what was being done. Hannah Arendt observed this pattern in her analysis of Adolf Eichmann. The banality of evil, she called it, though that phrase has been so often quoted it has lost some of its precision. Her actual observation was more specific, that evil at industrial scale does not require evil people. It requires a system in which each participant performs a narrow, procedurally legitimate function and is never required to see the aggregate. Eichmann scheduled trains. He did not think of himself as a mass murderer. He thought of himself as a logistics administrator. The American officers who processed Paperclip recruits were not Eichmann's. The moral inversion was not equivalent. But the structural mechanism was recognizable. Each officer was asked to evaluate a specific candidate against specific criteria. No single officer was asked to evaluate the program. No single officer was required to hold the full picture in their hands and pass judgment on it as a whole. The system distributed the dissonance until it was undetectable at any single point. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. The program worked, not just administratively, scientifically, technically, in ways that shaped the trajectory of the century. Von Braun's team, working first at Fort Bliss and later at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, became the technical core of what would eventually become NASA. The Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo 11 to the moon in 1969 was a direct descendant of work that von Braun had begun inside the Third Reich. The engineers who built it included men who had been wearing SS uniforms 24 years earlier. This is the recontextualization that most accounts of Operation Paperclip resist making explicit. The moon landing, the most celebrated technological achievement in human history, The event broadcast to 600 million people as a monument to human aspiration was built on a foundation that was morally compromised at its origin, not incidentally, structurally. The question this raises is not whether the achievement was real. It was real. The question is what it means that the architecture of a civilization-defining triumph was constructed in significant part by men whose earlier work had required slave labor and produced weapons designed to kill civilians. The surface answer is, history is complicated.
The deeper answer is, we chose which part of the complication to look at, and we made that choice with great consistency over a long period of time in ways that were convenient. Robert Cialdini's work on influence, specifically his documentation of commitment and consistency as a mechanism of persuasion, is relevant here. Once a course of action has been initiated, the psychological pressure to maintain consistency with that action increases with each subsequent step. The first paperclip recruitment created institutional pressure toward the second. The second created pressure toward the third. By the time the program had moved 1,600 scientists into American institutions, the accumulated momentum of prior commitments made any serious moral accounting feel retroactively destabilizing, not just politically inconvenient, psychologically threatening. To examine the foundation honestly would have required every person who had built on top of it to reassess their own role. That is a cost most institutions do not pay voluntarily. You do this, not with Nazi scientists, not at that scale, but the mechanism is not scale dependent. It is a feature of human cognition, not a feature of extraordinary moral failure. You have held information about a person, a colleague, a partner, an institution that should have changed your relationship with them. You had the information, you filed it, you attached it to a separate category from the category in which you needed that person to function. You did not forget it, you did not deny it, you reclassified it as irrelevant to the task at hand. This is not weakness, it is architecture. The mind cannot operate in a state of permanent moral accounting. It constructs categories, it assigns weights. And the weights it assigns are not neutral calculations, they are influenced heavily by what you need the outcome to be. Stanley Milgram demonstrated in 1961 and 1962 that ordinary people would administer what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to strangers when the instruction came from an authority figure in an institutional context. 65% of subjects went all the way to the maximum level. They were not sadists. They were people who had successfully reframed their own participation, from active harm to procedural compliance. They were following the protocol. They were doing their job. The moral weight of the outcome had been distributed onto the authority that issued the instruction. The American officers who signed off on paperclip recruitment files were doing something structurally similar. The moral weight had been distributed upward to the Joint Chiefs, outward to the Cold War threat environment, forward to the future, where the accounting would presumably happen at some later point. It never did. When you make a decision you know is compromised, and you manage the dissonance by distributing the responsibility to circumstances, to authority, to necessity, to the complexity of the situation, you are not doing something unusual. You are operating exactly as the human cognitive system was built to operate. The paperclip is the tell. It is the administrative artifact of a decision that could not be made cleanly, so it was made procedurally. The procedure created just enough distance from the moral content to make the decision feel manageable. You have your own paperclips. Most people do. Here is the clinical observation. Take it or leave it. Moral exclusion is not an aberration in institutional behavior. It is a default setting. Any institution operating under sufficient resource pressure and sufficient strategic urgency will develop, without planning it, without acknowledging it, a mechanism for placing inconvenient moral questions outside the active decision boundary. The mechanism does not announce itself. It presents as pragmatism, as realism, as the mature recognition that the world is complicated and that purity of purpose is a luxury that real decisions cannot always afford.
The way to identify the mechanism in operation, in an institution, in a relationship, in your own reasoning, is not to look for the absence of moral language. Institutions under Paperclip produced moral language constantly. They referenced democratic values.
They cited the importance of freedom against Soviet totalitarianism. The moral language was present and fluent. What was absent was moral accounting directed at the specific, concrete, named individuals whose histories were inconvenient. The general remained intact. The particular was systematically quarantined. When you find yourself reasoning fluently about principles while consistently avoiding examination of a specific case, a specific person, a specific decision, a specific fact in your own history, that is the marker. The principle has become a mechanism for avoiding the particular. The abstraction is doing the work of the paperclip. The question is not whether this is happening.
In most institutions, in most extended relationships, in most careers of sufficient length, it is happening. The question is what specific thing you are currently not looking at directly, and what that cost will eventually be. Operation Paperclip officially ended. The scientists were absorbed, the institutions were built, the rockets flew. The records documenting what was downplayed to make all of that possible remained classified for decades. When they were eventually declassified and examined by historians, what they revealed was not the presence of monsters. What they revealed was the presence of a very efficient system, staffed by ordinary people, for managing the distance between what a government knew and what it was willing to account for. The last men recruited under programs related to Paperclip died as respected American citizens. Some received awards. Some have buildings named after them. The Paperclip was never on the file because anyone particularly wanted it there. It was there because without it, the file would have required a different kind of attention. And a different kind of attention would have required a different kind of answer. The architecture that produced Paperclip is not a historical artifact. It is a template. It is running right now, in institutions you interact with and in cognitive patterns you rely on, handling exactly the files you have decided are too complicated to examine directly. You already know which files those are. If this kind of clinical decode is what you came for, the channel goes deeper every week. Subscribe.